can join us later, but thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Katie Galliato. I'm a reporter for the Star Tribune and also a member of the board of the Minnesota Society of Professional Journalists. I mentioned I just got a message from Sheila. We are plugging also our intern night coming up on October 22nd for college students, if anyone knows people in the area that are interested in learning about local internships. We'll have some information up on our website and social channels soon. But thank you for joining us here today. We are with Andy Mannix and Renée Jones Schneider of the Star Tribune here to talk about their investigation that was named MNSPJ's Story of the Year at our Page One banquets last June. And I'll introduce really quick. Andy and Renée are both my colleagues. Andy's a reporter who's done all sorts of public safety reporting, from breaking news to investigations like the one we're going to discuss today. Renée is a multimedia photographer who's worked on some of the Star Tribune's most ambitious photo and video projects for years. Hopefully all of you have read the story if you're coming to this talk, but it's called What Happened to Heather Mayer. Judges at our Page One Awards said, you know, this deep investigation of an often misunderstood community treated survivors with dignity and respect, and also pointed out some serious shortcomings in the criminal justice system. We're here today to talk to Andy and Renée about how they reported this piece. So I'll kick things off, but feel free to throw your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you have any as we go along. I think Becky is going to be monitoring them and will give me a heads up at any point if we don't catch them. So for that, maybe you guys can kick us off and just start telling us about maybe going back to the beginning and talk about how you started looking into Heather's story.
Yeah, and thank you for having us. Yeah, I had gotten a call from Heather's mom. I'm trying to remember when this would have been, 2021, I guess, which I just say because I remember it was like we were really in the middle of post George Floyd Minneapolis coverage, covering the trials of the officers. There was still a lot of unrest that would break out every now and then. So suffice to say, I wasn't like looking for a big story. But, she called me. I was getting a lot of calls around this time from people who just sort of felt like the criminal justice treatment system had treated them poorly, because that's what a lot of the coverage that we were doing at that time was addressing. So she called me and wanted to meet up. I didn't really have a super strong sense of what she wanted to tell me, but I did feel that she had kind of gone through every channel that she knew how to. I knew that her daughter had died, and she was just feeling like no one was listening to her. And I just remember feeling like I didn't want to be another person that just wasn't listening to her. So I was like, let's get coffee. I'll hear you out with just like no guarantees that this is going to lead to a story. And so we met in, I think it was in Lakeville, sort of halfway between Minneapolis and where she lives, at a Caribou Coffee. And she took me through everything that had happened. It was a really long conversation. And I just remember leaving really feeling like I didn't know if there was a story there, but I really wanted to look into. She had given me a lot, like some flash drives with body camera video, with everything she had been able to get. The fact that she had already done that work, I think was, intrigued me a little bit, because it's like a lot of times when we get calls from people, it's just, I think this, or, you can tell it's going to be like a he said, she said. It seemed like she had done a lot of the work that I would do, and that would take a long time to do. She had already done it. That would show, or get us as close as we can as to like what happened. And yeah, I just remember really like I remember leaving that conversation and sitting in the parking lot. I just have this like vivid memory of this moment, and going through, just responding to some emails and stuff like that. And then seeing her come out and sit down in her car and then immediately just like break down crying. And I could tell it was just really, really hard for her to go through all this and just keep reliving all of this stuff. So again, I just really wanted to not be another person who just blew her off or treated her like she was crazy. And then from there, it was like just one thing led to another. It was a really organic story. You know, after I went through everything she gave me, I was like, okay, who else can I talk to? And I found Bella and Morgan, and reached out to them, and they were thrilled that someone wanted to listen to them. You know, like I didn't know how they would react when I called them. And then, you know, talking to them led to talking to other people, led to finding out about other people that I wanted to talk to that initially didn't want to talk to me. And it was just kind of like continuing to pull on that thread, and it kept getting longer and longer, and just going down this rabbit hole. At some point approached Renée, and I was like, I guess I'll just say, I felt like this wasn't a great pitch to her, because I was like, I don't know where this is going or if it's ever going to be a story that we're going to publish, but I've become really interested in this. I think there's something there, and sort of want to get to the bottom of it. And the people that I was interviewing, I felt like were really real and candid, and there was a lot of emotion there. And I felt like, you know, if we could sort of show our editors what those interviews looked like, they would sort of see what I was seeing, and they would be interested in the story. So yeah, pretty early on, I approached Renée, who had done, as you said, some really good stuff for the Star Tribune, including a story that dealt with victims of rape who she had interviewed on camera. And so I was like, you know, Renée is someone who I think would be the right person to, if she was interested, and she like knows the sensitivities of you know, interviewing women who have gone through these types of traumas. So I approached her, and she was interested, and we kind of went back and started re-interviewing everyone that I was already talking to
on camera.
And I think actually bringing Renée in was really helpful, because I think after the first interview, she was like, this is a really good story. And I was like, okay, good. I'm really glad to hear like someone other than one of the voices in my head say that. I don't know if you want to talk about your role.
Yeah, I mean, both of us were like, well, I don't think our paper will ever run this story, but let's just see if there's a story. So we did all this stuff kind of like on the side without actually, I mean, I did. And I remember Deb Passner was on, she was the photo director at the paper at the time, and she was on a leave of absence doing a Neiman Fellowship. And when she came back for like Christmas break or something, I went on a walk with her and I told her that I had started this. And she's like, that's never going to run in our paper. Why are you wasting your time with this?
Yeah.
Well, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say,
yeah,
I think that we both felt like we really, at some point, felt really strongly about the story, but it was going to be a challenge to get into a daily newspaper, just because it was going to be so different than the type of stuff that you're used to reading. And not just the Star Tribune, but like, you know, any daily newspaper. The way that we wanted to do it was going to be a departure. So yeah, there was this big question of like, are they going to go for this? Our editor's going to go for this. So we did a lot of work before. I mean, I think my editor, Abby, I was talking to about it, and she was really supportive. But I think generally, like, to get the kind of clearance from higher up people at the paper, we knew was going to be a challenge.
Oh, we lost you guys on camera for a sec. Let me see. Andy and Renée, can you guys hear us? I wonder. Let me try and message them really quick.
Sorry, I don't know. My browser just crashed.
Oh, you're all good. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay. everyone in the group, in case you came late, a reminder, feel free to ask questions at any point if you have any. But I was going to follow up on what you guys were just saying. And, you know, I think no matter what type of outlet you're at, every journalist has had those stories where you're like, I'm going to need to convince my editor to get on board here. Like, how did you sort of make your pitch to them? And at what point in the process did you do that?
There was like a change in leadership, and we thought this is our chance.
Well, yeah, we thought our new editor-in-chief, who had been the managing editor, would be more receptive to this kind of story, to just doing something, you know, outside the box or whatever you want to call it. But so I think maybe a year
after you met Tracy, and about 6 months after I started like recording people. And
so I basically wrote a pitch that included almost like not even close to what the top of the story actually was, but that was like a lead and a top and sort of like the voice, and then kind of turned into a pitch. And Renée made a supercut of really good moments in interviews. And again, these interviews I think were so powerful, and that's where a lot of the power of the story. That's why we did obviously include a lot of them in the story. Hearing people say this stuff and sort of realizing these are real people, we thought was really powerful. And I think that Renée actually sent the video before I sent the pitch, so our editor had no context for it, and that I think actually helped a lot, because she was like, "What happened?" when we met her. Like, it was like, so like it didn't say what had happened.
Maybe that's where the headline came from.
Yeah, exactly. And then I sent her to the pitch. She was like, "Oh, okay." And so I think she was really intrigued by that and sort of saw that there was a powerful story here. And then we were sort of like campaigning, I think. I remember like cornering our editor in a bar and being like trying to get her excited about the story. And we were, and just every time I'd see her and she'd ask me how it was going, I'd be like, "Oh, okay, here's, what's happening now." And so I think that we were trying to kind of build that, I think every editor wants a good story. Like everyone wants to do something that's different also, like that. Like, I think there's a lot of things that, but it was, it took some convincing, I think, to show them that this wasn't just a story about sex. And we were going to write it in a way where people weren't going to see it as just a story about like a lurid lifestyle or whatever. We kind of had some preconceived notions, I think, that everyone held about what the story might have looked like, that we had to combat. And at some point, I think I realized that like I just had to sort of write it. So I wrote the first 2 parts, not there's a lot of editing and stuff, but wrote it as completely and thoroughly and as well as I possibly could, just so everyone could kind of see. Like, I didn't want to have a nut graph, which I knew was going to be controversial. I wanted it to really be like a pure narrative that just showed, rather than, the show don't tell rule, like really just showed you narratively all the ways in which the system failed these women. And so I think that, at some point I just realized I really needed to write that, and it needed to be good. Like, I didn't want to, come half-cocked. Like, I wanted it to really almost feel like a final product. And that draft was really well received by our editors and also other people around the paper. We started, we were able to share that with people like designers and people that start thinking about, what the story could look like in print and online. And I think that there was like some excitement from people, like people understood it, and people were like, this is a chance to do something different and a chance to tell a different kind of story. And so I think that, that helped, that people were excited about it.
It also helped that kind of about the time that we pitched the story, like things started happening. So like Isan got, he had a court case in Dakota County, and then he was arrested in Arizona. And then there was new victims that we're learning about. And so then it started to be like, oh, now there's 3 other victims.
Right.
Who
would suddenly were willing to talk to us. Because I mean, a lot of these people were still with him when we started reporting, and it was like, it didn't seem very likely they would talk to us. I think a few of them I reached out to and didn't respond. But yeah, so a lot of stuff happened after we started the reporting process. I mean, it took 2 years from when I first met with Tracy, the mom, to do this. And I think that actually helped the story in a way. I mean, it helped me be able to figure it out, but also things transpired that made the story stronger.
Up until basically it published, because that's when he went to prison for assault in Florida.
So at some point we ended up getting a little bit more buy-in from the paper, and all these people that I had been interviewing over the phone, they were like, gave us a little bit of a travel budget. So we went to Arizona, we went to Florida several times, Renee even more, and Nebraska. We drove to Omaha, Nebraska in a snowstorm. I mean, so there was a lot of, so we were able to kind of, and that helped the story too, I think, is being able to, people I've been talking to over the phone because they're across the country, being able to meet them in person, being able to have them meet me, being able to have them show us things, going to places. We went to the places where a lot of the abuse occurred. And that just, I think, gives you, especially when you're trying to write a narrative, more of a picture in your mind of what it looked like. And so, yeah.
That's interesting to me. It sounds like so many of these women were, almost like relieved and glad that you guys reached out to them and were telling this story. But at the same time, I guess, I'm curious how you approached people and got them to open up about such sensitive and personal topic. I mean, on camera even, can you talk about, I guess, how you sort of built those relationships with these sources over time?
Well, it started with Andy just really connecting with people, because he would talk to them for 6 months sometimes. And some of these people were really in a fog of abuse that they kind of had to get out of to be able to be willing to talk on the record, I think, over time.
Totally. Yeah, there was a lot of, again, people not calling me back right away or having no interest in talking to me. And then trying to just keep that line open and talking at first on background or off the record or whatever. And then sort of moving it to on the record. Yeah. So, I guess I think I had to convince them that I was trustworthy. Right. And that and the fact that it wasn't just I called once and then we wrote a story. They could see I was invested in this in more of a longer term. I think that it was really hard for them, some of them in particular, to talk to me and to make that decision. And everyone at some point decided that they were willing to put their names with it. Because that was the conversation we were having. It's is this going to be, are we going to use first names only or whatever? Because these women had been victims of domestic abuse. And so we thought there was a good reason, if they weren't comfortable with it, to not use their names. But at some point, I think, or at least for some of them, but I think that they began to see it as a way to kind of take the power back in a way, to sort of have some control over their own story and put their face to it once they sort of trusted that I was interested in sort of getting to the bottom of this. And again, I think that no one had really listened to them for so long that I think it was refreshing to have somebody who cared, and then, another reason I wanted to work with Renee was because I was I'm just some guy, right? And are they going to have a hard time opening up to me? I thought, I didn't want two men to just be showing up at their doorstep, right? So I think, Renee was in many ways my first choice of someone to work with, knowing she would kind of balance that out a little bit. I don't know if it was too much of a problem that I was a man.
And he was really good with the victim survivors. He's very, very good. Because sometimes when you work with people that have been through trauma, you really need to talk to them a lot and have constant communication with them. And he took tons of calls, especially from Tracy, day and night, every day. And so he's very good at that. He is the patience of a saint. And also, I mean, we shouldn't discredit Bella and Morgan, they also were really good at helping us connect with other people and telling them to trust, they can trust us. And they really were good advocates for getting people to talk to us too.
Very much so. I think that, that really does help when you have someone who can kind of vouch for you, because again, it's like, I can't expect anyone to trust us. Just like, hey, I'm a reporter and you should implicitly trust me, like that. Like, I think that's unrealistic. You really have to earn that, and just by showing that you are trustworthy. And yeah, Renee's totally right. I think starting with Bella and Morgan, and really helped get those other women to talk. And I think that's a good lesson. Is like
they would call people for you, and they
would sort of vouch for us, and sort of finding someone who can be, your. And also, by the way, not just with the other women who were abused, but with just people in the BDSM community, that we really want to talk to other people in Heather's BDSM group. We also talked to like academics and people, we really wanted to understand BDSM, but we interviewed several people that weren't even in the story, that we just like wanted to understand the subculture that was, we really didn't understand, I think, going into the story. So we could sort of write with that authority, and they were good at helping us with that as well.
We have a question in the chat from John Collins. This was obviously a failure of law enforcement, but I was struck by the failure of the kink community to address ongoing abuse, which is kind of the opposite of what advocates in the community claim. What sort of responses did you get from people involved in these kink scenes?
A really positive response from people who, there were several people who reached out and said, this is like the only story that I've ever read that like got it right about what BDSM is. I think that people
or isn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people really feel like they've been poorly portrayed over the years by 50 Shades of Grey or whatever is it, like whatever the average person's introduction to BDSM is, they feel like has sort of been exploitative, and it's painted as something that is much more lurid and dangerous and whatever than it is. And it's like, most of these people who are in these communities are very normal in like every aspect of their life, and then they're into BDSM for various reasons. Many because they were abused at some point and sort of wanted to take the power back in this
or some sort of trauma. Like one person we spoke to just had like a really traumatic experience when her father died, and it was just a way for her to gain some like power back from that.
So anyway, I think people were appreciative in the BDSM community that we took the time to sort of get that right and try to understand that world, which was the setting, obviously, for all of this abuse. So yeah, pretty positive. I mean, there were a lot of questions, I think, though, as to like how the BDSM community polices itself and whether it's effective enough and whatnot. I mean, that was, we talked to a lot of Heather's friends who were like, she was actually the most actively, vigilantly looking out for everybody else, making sure people weren't getting with these sort of predators that lurk in these circles. So there was a lot of people who were very surprised that, that she found herself in that sort of situation.
So I have a question. I can't raise my hand because I'm the host. But it was 3 years from the time that I think you first spoke to Heather's mom until it was published. And I wonder, like, that's not an unheard of amount of time for like a project like this, but I imagine for sources, they could have been feeling impatient or did they, like, were they like ever like, so you ever going to do a story? You're just going to keep talking to us, and how did you navigate that?
Totally. It was like that. I think it was 2 years from when we published to when I first started talking to people. So there were, Tracy, the mom, and Bella and Morgan, I was talking to them. They were the first people we talked to. So yeah, I was sort of talking to them for a really long time. I think that is really hard. And, you know, some of it was like, I just remember at one point, I kept trying to be really transparent with them about where I was at and what I needed to do and when I thought it would run. And I remember telling them, I think it's going to run in January. And then it was like, I think February. And I was like, I think March. And then it was like,
I kept telling them, and I'm like, stop.
yeah, I know. Well, it's like you want to be really open, but some of the stuff is out of your hands, right? Like a lot of it was the design that was holding it up, or we were trying to get resources from other parts of the newsroom.
Or just when to run the story timing wise based on other stories that we have going. And just, there's a lot of strategy and, when you publish certain kinds of stories.
There was an election at one, and you're like, we can't run, there's all these like things
you can't run
that,
this around, the holidays.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's definitely like, we can't run this too close to Christmas. We can't run this too close to Mother's Day. There's like stuff like that kept coming up where it kept moving. And I think that I just tried to be really open with them about the fact that like, we're doing this is going to happen. And just like, here's what's going on, why it keeps moving. And most people were really appreciative of that. I felt like probably there were some folks who were getting frustrated. And I was kind of frustrated too at some points,
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a story that's like ready to go and it's holding for months, like there's a sort of itchiness that one gets as a reporter. You want it to be out there. It's like, it's fact check. It's good right now, but like, who knows what's going to happen. So yeah, I think just like keeping real clear communication, being transparent, even when it's like, you kind of have to acknowledge like, well, I did think, I thought I was going to run and now I was wrong.
I would say to Tracy a lot, like the longer this is taking, the better it's going to be in the end. It's going to be more polished and more people are going to talk to us. And I just say we could just publish it, next weekend, and then it'll just be like a daily story, or it could be really cool. Like, because it took so long, it became a special section, So I think I always try to tell people, just be the patient. The longer a story takes, it's probably going to be a bigger deal when it publishes.
Kristen, go ahead.
Hey guys, it's Kristen. I am curious, Andy, if you can kind of talk through writing the lead for the story, because you had such a powerful character in Tracy who brought so much to this, trying to get justice for her daughter. But hearing about this from the medical examiner investigator's point of view right off the bat, was that strategic in any way to help bring the audience in, or was it just basically based on the best narrative way to start the story and bring the viewer to like the scene of the death?
Great question, because I spent so much time trying to craft. Just the structure of the story was really a challenge, and I sort of outlined, and then there were just things that weren't working. I could talk all day about it, but you have so many different characters, so many different timelines and perspectives, and you want to get to certain information quickly. And sometimes that doesn't fit if you're just trying to go in chronological order. So anyway, I kind of thought it had to start with Heather's death. That had to be the opening scene. And then the first story would be kind of from the perspective of these other women, the second from Tracy, and then the third would be like, they needed to sort of connect. They needed to meet to sort of get things happening, like he was convicted of violating a restraining order 2 years or whatever it was after she died. And it needed sort of both of them to both groups to kind of combine these resources. So I think starting with Tracy, the mom, would have just narratively been too confusing to then jump back to these other women. The medical examiner was, I thought, such a great character, but it was sort of like, I can only use her once. I felt like she's not going to be a main character. She's not going to be, we're not going to see a lot of things from her perspective. She can really only come in to the story at one point, because then it's just like another person you have to remember. So I'd written the introduction about 1 million times, and it it's just like, I just wasn't working. So then when she was willing to go on the record and all that, I was like, maybe I could sort of reframe this instead of just like the narrator voice of God, is from the perspective of somebody where if we can see it through her eyes, we'll see it differently. Like we can use her expertise as a narrative character to sort of see what she sees, because she's seen all kinds of red flags. And if I were just to describe it, I mean, I don't know, the reader, might be able to glean that it seems like something's wrong here, but she could say it definitively. So I sort of had this idea of like starting with setting up sort of what she's looking for, and then we sort of see it through her eyes. And once you know what she's looking for, you kind of know what you're looking for too. So yeah, it was kind of like, but yeah, there was a hard decision of like, okay, I could have her there, or I could have her sort of toward the end, and it's like she's analyzing all this stuff and everything you've seen through the story. You now have an expert saying, here's why these were red flags to me. But I was like, no, I think this is the better way to do it. To start with her, to not really have her in it again, to show this. I mean, there are so many things that she said to me that I thought were really fascinating. Like she thinks about this story all the time, or this story, this death, right? She's someone who sees death every day. She's seen thousands of these scenes, and she's like, this is the one that I always think about. So I felt like that was just a really powerful way to start it. I also wanted to write it kind of like a mystery novel, because it is a mystery, right? Like in that sort of like whatever the daily newspaper version of that sort of voice is, I guess. So like starting with a detective seemed like a good way to do it. I think that really the detectives in the story are the mom and these other women. They're the ones who are kind of like peeling back all these different layers, and we're sort of seeing it through their eyes. But for that first scene, she was the stand-in kind of for the detective who's taking us through all this stuff. But yeah, it was really just seeing it was seeing the evidence through the eyes of someone who kind of knows what it's supposed to look like, right? Like her being able to say, a woman, I've never seen a woman hang herself naked with her, especially with her kids upstairs. That's something, there's no study or anything that I can cite that say women never do, but she's like, I've seen so many suicides, and this is just, there's something about this one that it's not to say they couldn't happen, but when she saw 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 things that were like, this is really unusual for what this presents to be, and it makes me think there's more to it. And then you see how the cops reacted, which were very much like, they started calling it a suicide within minutes. Anyway, that was the idea behind the lead, was sort of setting this up without giving away too much, setting up that there's something about this scene that isn't what it presents to be.
Another question I had was, I guess, I'm curious, how did you decide sort of what details to include and which ones to leave out, especially when it came to the abuse? I know there was a trigger warning up right at the top of the story, but it's sort of like, I think you did strike a good balance of like showing the severity of the situation, but I'm sure that you were also like didn't include certain things. And I guess, can you talk about that sort of tug and pull? If I'm assuming there were many conversations about what to include visually and in the story.
We had a ton of conversations about this. I'll let Renee talk about the visual parts, but just in terms of writing, and sort of what I wanted was, we felt like if we were euphemistic about it, then we would essentially be doing what the police were doing, which is being like, this is kind of weird, and this is unusual, and these are like others, Whereas I think that we wanted to treat it like, this isn't that. First of all, this is like very common, this kind of fetish, but also it's like it's really not like what you're picturing from Pulp Fiction or whatever. So we wanted to describe it. I felt very strongly about describing it head on, and not using vague language. But of course, the balance is, you don't want to be too lurid or feel like you're using details that are like tabloidy or, we really wanted to be on that line of telling it straight up, but not going too far. So I think if there was, if you have hundreds of examples, like I was looking for the ones that sort of indicated how bad it was. Like this wasn't just, oh, they were dating this guy and he was such a jerk, or even he was abusive. Like this was sort of a sadistic form of psychological and physical abuse. So I would look for details like that I felt like were indicative of that. The fact that she or he or someone carved into her arm, daddy knows best. Like I thought that was a very indicative detail of the kind of relationship they were in. There's a detail about he hit Bella with a pipe or something and it broke her wedding ring, or pushed her face into cat litter so hard that she was like finding grains of cat litter days later. Like those were details that I thought were really representative of the kind of abuse we were talking about. That said, I think that we really, some of the abuse is much worse than I think we just described. And we just there's like one in particular I'm thinking of where we were shown photos of the aftermath and it looked like this person was, you would be shocked that someone was alive that has sustained those injuries.
So yeah, like he's talking about like the daddy knows best thing. Like we had all those we had photos of all that stuff, and we originally had them in like the edit for the paper, but there was a meeting after meeting where it slowly edited out a lot of the graphic stuff. Even though we're like, it's a black and white photo of, someone's arm, but there was some things that some people wanted to cut that we were just really put our foot down on. Actually, no pun intended. Like the one of the photos was like him putting his foot on her face, which was when she had a restraining order against him.
And the chain is around her neck that she died in.
They really wanted to cut that photo. We're like, that is such an important photo for this narrative. And also, I forgot to say early on, Andy's had Heather's entire phone. So he had all her social media photos, her and
text messages
and all that stuff.
Videos.
So Andy went through all of that. I only went through some of it, but some of it was like really hard to watch and look at, I think, for him.
And so, yeah, it's like so it's part of the story, but it's like, how do you, get that across without it? Because here's the other thing is like, aside from being, we're a daily newspaper and you read it at the breakfast table and all that stuff, it's like you don't want readers to stop reading. And I think we were right up to that line of like,
yes,
this is too much for me and I need to put this down. And when I did get plenty of people who said I did have to put it down, but I picked it back up. I needed to take a break or something like that. So I think we hit the right balance. There were some things that Renee and I wanted to get in. I wanted to get in, I don't remember if you did or not, the photo of her that we were just talking about where she had Daddy Knows Best carved with a knife in her arm. I just thought that, again, that photo was so representative of like, this is not a healthy relationship. So yeah, we won and lost some debates. But yeah, a lot of the reporting was just like going through photos and seeing the evidence of this stuff. And I mean, you can imagine that this was, I mean, they documented everything as part of their relationship. And so you can imagine most of those weren't things that they would want other people to see. But I do think that they wanted the victims wanted it represented how badly they were treated. And
also they wanted someone to see it, even if it's not being published. Like there was plenty of things that photos people gave us that it was pretty sure we're not going to publish that photo, but it was just shocking for us to like see that how horrible the aftermath of the abuse that they went through was. So part of it was just for us to get a bigger picture, I think, to really understand the severity of it. But it's like you could never publish that stuff.
Yeah, to understand the difference between you know, abuse and BDSM, you know, to say, I asked for this, yes, but did I ask for this? Of course I didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
How could, you know, you can't consent to being electrocuted and beaten and what, you know, all these things that happen to them. So
We have about 15 minutes left. I want to pause for a second. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself now and ask, or throw them in the chat. Another one I have, and you sort of touched on it at the beginning, Andy, but I guess I'm curious, at what point did you realize there was sort of a bigger story of systemic failure here, and it wasn't just, you know, this one woman's sort of narrative, or like almost like a missing unsolved crime story?
I think that what I love and feel, I guess, proud of about this story is that it was so organic of how we were pulling on that thread and how everything led to more. I certainly, when I approached Renee or when I talked to my editor or when I started thinking about this to myself, was never like, oh, this will turn into a, you know, 10,000 word special section narrative. So I think that came pretty naturally. Like, I remember at first when I first talked to the mom and was thinking, you know, that a lot of the stuff she was saying was pretty well supported by the evidence. I remember thinking, like, maybe this is part of a story about domestic abuse and how police respond to domestic abuse with certain kinds of victims. Or maybe this is kind of a story about BDSM and, you know, in a community that involves some consensual violence, or kind of like playing with power, you know, where's the line or whatever. Like, so I was thinking of it as a smaller sort of enterprisey story. But it was just, I think it was like when I started to see, okay, it wasn't just like, at first I was like, okay, there's one police officer who is the investigator, who we quote in the story saying things like, well, you can't enter a boxing match and then sue the guy for, you know, winning or something like that. Like, that was sort of you know, he was trying to explain why he didn't think that the women had any evidence of a crime occurring, or however you want to put it, didn't deserve justice. At first I was like, okay, so there's this bad police officer here, or he didn't do a very good job. But then it was like, well, then there's the prosecutor, and then we had you know, police in another state saying this, and a judge there doing this. And it just was sort of like, it just seemed like it wasn't a bad actor. It was really just everybody failed her. You're right. Like, if you want to make a list of everyone that failed Heather in the criminal justice system, it was pretty long, and failed the other women too. So I think that just happened naturally. And then there's this question of like, well, how do you present that? And I give Renee a lot of credit for her being like, I remember just like coming back from one of these interviews, telling her all these ways I was thinking about it. You know, what, you know, is it like, is there a data set that I can tie this to? Or is it about restraining orders or whatever? And she was like, why don't you just like tell it like as it happened? And I was like, even though that's really obvious, I think I'm just so trained in this like daily newspaper way to be like, this is a data story about what? I'm gonna like reverse engineer it to find the data set that, I don't know. It really did click with me of like, what if I structured it? What if I made a list of all of the people that failed her and all of the moments in which they could have stopped this person, including like the day Heather's body was found, right? Like, the next day, a new woman was abused by this guy. If police would have done more that day. So I made a list of all of those, and then I sort of outlined it around all of those moments. And so it was like, you're almost like getting a tour of the criminal justice system through the perspective of people it did not work for. Because there's no question, it did not work for them, the criminal justice system as we know it. So anyway, it was just really like, that's how we decided to tell this bigger story, was just through just showing you all of these moments and hoping people sort of took that from it, you know, like understood what we were trying to do.
Kristen has
Kristen,
another-
go ahead.
Yeah. I want to go back to kind of the point you guys were talking about, like the fact that you had all the body camera video, that you had Heather's phone. That's a lot of like source documentation to kind of keep track of. Can you just give everybody some advice for how to essentially like store and sort and reference all that stuff back as you're reporting? Because I know a lot of times when people want to do big enterprise, it comes with all these like source documents. So any advice or tips on kind of how you organized yourselves moving through the process to then be able to reference back stuff?
Well, when it came to the phone, we actually had IT back up the whole phone on a computer and then put it onto a different phone so that we would have our own copy. We could give it back to Tracy, which was pretty huge.
And then in terms of organizing it, it was tough because there was like, okay, here's her Instagram account, here's a Facebook account, here's her text messages, here's her photos, and you know what your stuff looks like. It's not in any particular order, and there's all kinds of personal stuff on there that certainly I probably had no business looking at, other than the fact that her mom wanted me to look at this stuff. So yeah, it was sort of like trying to find the ones that were important to the story, and put those in folders or put those in, make a timeline or something like that in a way that is easy to go back to. Because when you're working on something for a really long time, you kind of forget, like, I mean, A, you need to know where stuff is, but B, like, you kind of forget, like, the first time I saw that photo was sort of this holy shit moment for me, where I was like, okay, this is a big deal. But now I've seen that photo 1,000 times, and I put it in memos, and I've talked about it with my editor, and I kind of forgot that a reader was going to think that's a big deal, because it is a big deal, but you kind of like lose sight of stuff like that. So I try to make notes that say, like, here's, that remind myself of how I felt when I first saw that. So anyway, yeah, organization, I think, is really critical. I mean, me and my editor spent, I don't know, 9 days with our lawyer fact checking the story, and a lot of it was going over all of this stuff. So it's like we really had to be organized going into that. So I actually had a document, like a draft of the story in Google Docs, and I had sort of all these comments of like where everything was that was in it. So when we were going through all that, I knew where everything was. I wasn't like searching, through file after file after file, because we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, probably of photos and everything else. So yeah, I think we all have like romanticized this idea of journalists having all these papers stacked on their desks and being like, ink stained wretches who are totally disorganized and whatever. I would say, like, do not do that, because it's just going to make your life so much harder. I mean, you need, organize things in a way where if you're writing at 10 p.m. at night and you just sort of think of an idea and, need to go write it, where the thing is that you're thinking of. That's my advice.
When it came to visuals, actually, I thought our like cover was really cool, and actually it came out of like my organization for visuals, because originally the story was supposed to be originally we were thinking of doing 3-part story. So Andy had kind of separated the story into 3 parts. So I was like, I don't know, I got to make sure I have visuals for each day that they're going to run this story. So I went into this video editing bay at our place, and I made like a murder board, basically, of all my photos that I had, and like to make sure that we had good visuals for each story. And Kirsten's husband, Greg Meese, our designer, came in and saw it, and he's like, "Oh, we got to do that for the cover." And so we ended up making a whole like choreographed one. This is not what mine looked like at all. But we ended up, I ended up buying like a giant piece of foam at Home Depot and covering it with wool. And then we printed out all the photos. And this is actually like a physical thing that we photographed. It wasn't like done in Photoshop or anything.
I think we have
Also-
time. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing. Maybe people in television would be interested or have better advice for me. But when we got the body cam footage from South St. Paul, was it South St. Paul or West St. Paul?
South St. Paul?
It was, I couldn't download it. I had to record it, screenshot record it, but that didn't record the audio. So then I literally had to go on my son's PC and record the audio and put them together. I tried getting help from other professional videographers and there was no way around it. It was super time consuming to just get like a short video clip. I had to watch it, record them separately, link them together. It was just such a giant pain.
Yeah, as someone from TV who deals with that, I don't have a workaround for you, unfortunately.
Okay, I didn't know, like they make you watch it in their certain like browsing app.
In their player, yeah.
In their player, yeah.
Their player, it only like works with PCs and stuff. Yeah. So that actually is a fight for Mary Jo to take up, I would say, because that is not reasonably accessible data.
No.
That's me.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has any. Otherwise, I'll maybe wrap this up. I'd love to hear, I guess, if you guys can just talk about the aftermath. I know we talked a little bit about feedback from the BDSM community in particular, but what other sort of, I guess, feedback did you get? And can you talk about sort of the impact and further coverage you did a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. There's definitely like concern from people in the newspaper of what the reaction was going to be. And I think and I was kind of like, okay with it if there was a backlash or if there was people like, why are you writing? That was the question that some people, or that was the problem we thought some people would run into, is they'd be like, why am I reading this? Because there isn't a nut graph, there isn't like a clear, like, people, would they get it essentially? And I was really heartened with the response because it was there was like maybe one or two people that sent me negative responses. But we got so much positive responses. In fact, I still get responses from people who are finding the story and who are like, oh my God, this is so powerful and thank you. And they would describe sort of what they felt reading it. And it was like, oh man, they really got what we were going for. They got that this was a system story. They got why we were writing it. There were people who I think felt certain ways about their lifestyle or some of the choices, that the women made, but we're still like very sympathetic for what they went through and couldn't believe how they were treated by law enforcement in some cases. So there was, I think, an email at the bottom of the story that went to me and Suki, the editor of the paper, and we were both just like inundated with, I cover police, so like my emails are usually very bad. Like my emails are usually not like great job on this story. So I was like, or you just like don't hear anything. I mean, that's everything. It's like that was, I think, my worst fear is we're going to write this story that I spent all this time on, that we put all this production into, and then it's just like no one reads it. It was one of the most. It was like the 6th most read story on our website
Ever. Or in the first week
of the year.
Of the year? Oh, okay.
Which, like the number 1 read story on our website is like someone spotted Lady Gaga at a restaurant, or like this, like it was up there with the like very virally kind of thing. So with a story that's like over 10,000 words, the amount of time people spent reading it online, we were able to measure, and it was the highest we've ever had. So it was like people really seemed to read the story and engage with it and like feel strongly about what happens.
Yeah, so. I live in a community that's mostly retired people, and they would stop me when I'm walking my dog and be like, well, I don't agree with that lifestyle, but that was a really sad story and I read the whole thing. And
So yeah, I think that really gave me and hopefully other people at the paper, like the message is like people want this kind of, like I said at the beginning, this is a different kind of story than we're used to doing and that you're used to reading in the paper like Star Tribune. But I think that the feedback suggests like there's an appetite for this and sort of telling stories in different kinds of ways on subject matter that's difficult. There's a payoff to doing it well. Like there's a big readership for that, and nobody was like, oh, this is just about sex. Like no, like none of it was what you sort of think is possibly going to be the worst case scenario of how people respond. Like they just don't get it. Even the one or two negative emails I got, like at least one of them was someone who knew and was defending Hassan. So again, I think that the feedback was such that, and then of course other people who felt that they were victimized by him came forward. In terms of the follow-up, he was right after it came out. We went back down to Orlando to because he was being
No, that was right at the end. Was he
sent for the sentencing?
Was that a separate story?
Yeah.
Oh,
we did a separate story where we went down there again. And there's a lot of things still in the works. I think there was an organization that reached out to me, and I connected her with with the mom that is interested in sort of helping her, that specializes in these kinds of deaths. So she's still looking. The mom Tracy is still looking for justice.
There was some glimmers of hope that things might change, but they kind of fizzled.
Yeah, I mean it's all ongoing. One thing I'll say is we wanted a photo of Hassan the whole time, and we did not have one. And we went to Orlando for his court date, like I don't know, a few weeks maybe before the story came out.
I had been there twice before to photograph him.
And not
the first time I got something of him.
Did you?
No, the first time I got to court and they canceled his hearing for the day.
So she flies all the way. I mean, this is what it's like though to cover court. Like stuff gets moved. So she flew all the way down there to get a photo.
And they rescheduled it for like a month later or something.
But so when we finally got that, and then at that court hearing Holly agreed to talk and do a photo too. I remember that's when I was like, okay, we're like.
That was the bail hearing, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. It was the bail hearing.
And then he pled guilty and we went for that.
Yeah. Anyway, just like there's a lot of stuff that really we wanted, that we felt like it was incomplete. It was like the last thing we needed. And then we finally got. So I guess like the lesson is just keep going.
We got the picture of him in handcuffs because the story took so long to publish.
Yeah, and honestly, I loved so much that image of it. Sort of starts with her, being bound and by this chain, and then I loved kind of the symmetry of it ending with him in chains, like even if people in the story felt like it wasn't enough, there was some kind of semblance of justice there. So.
Well, I think we're right at time. So I just want to thank you guys so much for your time today. This was really fascinating for me and I hope helpful for everyone else out there. We will probably be posting this to our website, but yeah, thank you again. And thanks for your great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.